The following conversation is with Diana Ayton-Shenker. Diana is the CEO of Leonardo, a transdisciplinary network combining arts, science, and technology. She's also a professor of practice at the Arizona State University. Diana, it's such a great privilege to have you with me today, and I would love to kick off with a question about your creative process. I know that you wrote 4 books, and I'm curious to learn what was your creative process and how did you, at the end, finish the book?
Well, thank you so much, Ivona. It's great to be with you again. And I appreciate that question about my creative process. To be honest, it's not something I often stop and consider because it's so organic and embedded in who I am and how I'm working and how I'm showing up in the world. So the 4 books that I've written each had a different creative process. And the first 2 were the most similar because they were part of a series called A Global Agenda that was produced by the United Nations association that's now called the UN Foundation as an annual analysis of the UN's performance over the previous year and priorities for the General Assembly in the coming year. Both of those were highly analytical parts of my creative process and practice. They were very creative in that I had to take this kind of highbrow and heavy and dense analytical material and content and be creative in how to make that come alive and make that legible and connected so that people could connect with it. And the process was extremely collaborative. So in those cases, the Global Agenda books, the creative practice was very, very much about linking my more intellectual side with my more intuitive, creative side, and recognize that they're fluid, that they're not segmented in a siloed way, that they really are more effective when brought together. And that was mirrored by the collaborative effort with lots of other people. So bringing together experts from around the world to engage in this creative collaborative process for a common goal, setting the global agenda for the United Nations community was at the heart of that creative practice and process for those 2 books. The 3rd book was a completely different creative practice. It was my book of poetry called Tumbalalaika, which gets its name from one of the poems, Tumbalalaika, which is the name of a Yiddish lullaby that I grew up with and I sang to my children as well. And so it was very personal creative process and it was very individual. It took years and years of sort of waiting to be called for that poem to come through me and wrestling with it until I had a body significant enough to assemble into what was a very personalized and personal story told through poetry. And the art on the cover is art created by my husband and creative partner, Bill Ayton. So there were lots of personal dimensions to that creative process. And after the intuitive impulse of writing a poem, the more analytical engagement with that creative output of how to organize, how to present, how to distill a narrative through those individual pieces was an interesting, revealing part of the creative process. And then my last book, most recent book, New Global Agenda. The book isn't this size. This is a sign from one of the opening events. Also used artwork by my creative partner. So integrating that partnership with my husband was very meaningful for me. And we took a global agenda concept from the UN work I had done to look at the larger international community of a new global agenda and recognize the priorities, practices, and pathways for the international community, which is all of us. And that creative process was very much about taking a previously established approach and a previously successful creative output and repurposing, reimagining what it could be in a completely new context. In this case, the context of the Sustainable Development Goals and the climate change progress we had so much promise and hope for at the beginning of 2016 that then collided with political and social shifts and collapses that made it imperative to revisit that creative output.
That's very interesting, because what you basically described right now to me is the wonderful collaboration between two parts of yourself, the intuitive part and analytical part, to create a book, but also a collaboration and co-creation between you and other people globally on different topics and different agendas in general. I know that many people actually, let's say, suffer from the disconnect between the analytical part and the intuitive part in their creative processes. How do you tap into that? How do you combine both of them? And how do you tap into your creative potential in general? Do you have any suggestions for that?
Thank you. That's a great question. I think to tap into the connective tissue between our analytical and intuitive parts we're supported by the idea that it is a practice and a process more than just an end goal linear approach that has that outcome. When we think about our intellectual, analytical, and our intuitive parts as if they are distinct from each other, then we are doing ourselves a disservice by working against that inherent connectivity. What helps is to remember this more as a process than a product. So the process is a practice of exploring, of playing, of recognition, a dialogue and a dance between all the different parts of how we engage with knowledge in the world. Now, how that plays out very practically is to be interdisciplinary. So the interdisciplinary approach to these books that we've mentioned is really helpful in that I can't just think about one part of an issue or an idea. I have to draw on, if we're looking at issues of climate change, if we're looking at issues of gender equality, if we're looking at issues of engaging with different intelligences, with artificial intelligence and interspecies, I have to look at different approaches. I have to bring in different voices, not only from around me, the collaborators and contributors I'm able to mobilize, which is part of the creative practice, but also from within our own life experience. And this is how we live our lives. We don't live our lives in a linear, siloed way. I don't go through the whole day as someone who just eats food or prepares food, or someone who just writes documents or reads material. I'm engaging in sensual and multisensorial processes all the time, and all the parts of my body and my brain are lit up. Why would we be any different in our approach to our work or our creative experience? our work and our creative output lights up all of us. And we mirror that in the way that we approach it by engaging with different kinds of people and partners, different kinds of projects and programs and initiatives. And that's very helpful in making those connections. I think also there's a healthy disregard we can keep in mind for the advice that doesn't serve us well, and the examples and the systems that are entrenched around us that really don't fit. And if we can be so courageous and curious and foolish as to remain fresh and to ignite that and reignite that beginner's mind, then it doesn't occur to us not to. And I'll give you two examples to get more concrete. They're both what if examples. So the first more recently was how I approach with my creative partner and husband, Bill Ayton, the large-scale augmented reality art installation in Union Square in New York City. In 2019, we wanted to install what turned out to be an 18-story installation, like a skyscraper, a 10-story tower with a rotating 8-story globe above it, right in the middle of Union Square in New York City. So there's a virtual, through an augmented reality tower in the middle of these skyscrapers. And when we approached our partners at the X Reality Center of the New School as a side event for UNGA, UN General Assembly's gathering in 2019 and celebrating the centennial of the New School, we said, well, what if we did it this way? What if we approach AR art at this scale, with this kind of public access, to inspire this integration of what technology could be and how it might ignite and excite our imagination through art as a creative experiment? And we were told, no, you don't understand. That's not the way AR art works in 2019. And we said, well, what if we looked at it differently? What if we keep that beginner's mind? We don't know that we can't do it. Let's just try it. Let's say this advice that says it doesn't work that way isn't the right advice. The examples we have aren't yet the right examples. And we experiment. So we draw from the spirit of science and the practice of science to experiment with new technologies through art. And we did it. And it was awesome and amazing. The second example I'll give you of that creative process that cuts across siloed expectations of being intellectual, analytical, or being creative, intuitive, comes from 30 years ago, 31 years ago, when we were at the UN in Geneva, where you and I had the opportunity to reconnect just last month. But in 1993, I organized what was a historic exhibit of art created by William T. Ayton, my partner, inspired by the 30 Articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this exhibit was installed at the entrance to the UN in Geneva. All the visiting tours of the UN during Human Rights Week began with a talk I gave on human rights and letting these ideas of what are fundamental freedoms, what are human rights, come alive through art installed in this space. And it was amazing. And all of the thousands of visitors were inspired and touched by this experience that we carried out when we were very young. And I called Bill like a year ago when I was revisiting the UN and reminded of this. I said, I can't believe we did that. How did we do that? And he said the most wonderful thing related to what if. He said, it's amazing what you can do when you don't know that you can't.
That's true.
It's amazing what you can do when you don't know that you can't. This is how we ignite our imagination. This is how we engage in a creative process. When we don't know that we can't do it, we ask what if, and we assume and we acknowledge and recognize that what's analytical and intellectual is inherently engaged with what is intuitive and creative. That's the creative process.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for giving us this wonderful two examples of making the impossible possible when you know that you can do absolutely anything and there are no boundaries, no limitations for yourself, but also for people involved. It a little bit comes to what you also mentioned during the AI for Good Summit. You mentioned the 4 wonderful I's. And for me, that's an example of a creative leadership or leadership in general, combining inspiration, intention, integrity, and impact. Could you please elaborate on 4 of them?
Yes, well, I love that you're struck by these 4 I's of inspiration, intention, integrity, and impact. They've been guiding forces for me as what I call the cardinal directions of my values in action compass. And they were inspired as a guide for my creative practice, as an expression of my creative practice in social enterprise and entrepreneurship. When a colleague at the Clinton Global Initiative was talking about his experience working in Western Africa as a social entrepreneur, and not having an example in front of him, not having a roadmap of how to be creative in solving social problems through business, through social enterprise. And then he said he realized what he held in his hand was a compass, a moral compass, and that could guide him. And I thought to myself, as I was creating my social enterprise, a fast forward fund, creating new ways of connecting resources and energy for social change in new ways, that I held a compass in my hand. And these were my values put in action. And it was on me to define what those cardinal directions were. And it emerged for me that they were inspiration, intention, integrity, and impact. And how that guides me through creative practice is that we begin with our inspiration, the source that makes us go, that inspiring of breath that wakes us up in the morning, that keeps us up at night, that inspiration that is the spark of our imagination. That's the first direction in our values and action compass. The intention is what we do with that inspiration in our visioning. So intention is the vision of how we're going to put that inspiration into some outcome, into some change in the world that allows us to build on Gandhi's imperative to not only be the change we want to see in the world, but to recognize in order to do that, we have to first see the change we want to be in the world. And to see the change we want to be in the world, that intention calls on our creative imagination, our spark, our spirit. Artists are especially gifted at guiding us with that intention. So are other kinds of creative visionary leaders, setting that intention. And the third compass point, that third I from inspiration, intention, and integrity is integrity. Integrity means that which is both honorable, that which has integrity, that which is the scaffolding that supports with stability a structure. It's also that which is integrated, that which is whole. integrity which is embedded in the actions we're undertaking. So having the inspiration to do something, the intention, the vision to carry that out requires integrity if we're going to actually create something, if we're going to be creative in a way that leads us to that fourth eye, the fourth cardinal direction of that values in action compass, and that's impact. That answers the question, not what if, but so what? What is the impact that it's making? What is the difference that it's making? It's not enough just to be well-intended. It's not enough to be well-intentioned. It's not enough to be clever or pretty. We need to acknowledge that our words and our relationships and our actions have impact, and ultimately trust that we are here to be doing this work. So those are the 4 I's of the values in action compass that guide my creative practice and the way I try to approach my life with inspiration, intention, integrity, and impact.
This is a very strong foundation for co-creation in general.
I hope so. And I appreciate your bringing in co-creation. I think that whether we are creating work or engage in a creative practice independently or collaboratively, there is always a co-creation. Even if I'm by myself in my creative practice across art, science, technology, or any sphere of human activity, I'm bringing into that creative process all of the influences that have come from others before and around me. That co-creates. That's part of the co-creative work. Anything that I design or develop or devise and share out is then received or repurposed or activated or engaged with by others. And that also is part of the co-creative process. So we are always interconnected through creativity, and the more explicit, direct co-creation of collaboration is a more explicit example of that, but it's always a co-creation.
Absolutely. Also, the co-creation that you described before between analytical brain or analytical creativity and your intuition. That's a huge co-creative process as well.
Well, we now know with fMRIs, new imaging technology, that when we are deeply involved in creative acts, in creative process, it's not just one artsy part of our brain that lights up. It's multiple parts of our brain, including an interface between the hemispheres, between the lobes. So we have the science revealed to us through the technology that visualizes how co-creative we are as creative beings.
Which is beautiful. I can also imagine that all of the 4 I's have influenced your work at Leonardo. Could you please give us some examples of how they influence your work?
Well, I love that question of how to apply this this vision of the 4 I's in the values and impact compass to my work as CEO of Leonardo. I am constantly challenged by and truly invigorated by the interplay between these compass points. So while we might think of applying inspiration, intention, integrity, and impact through the work of managing an international nonprofit organization with multiple partnerships through Leonardo's partnership with MIT Press, through our publications with Tsinghua University in China, with Arizona State University in Arizona, our network of lasers, our hosts of events in over 55 cities around the world, our programs of fellowships, researches, research and art experiences, we might think about applying those systematically. The inspiration for each of these activities, the intention of each of these activities, the integrity for the organization and its community, the impact that we have in the world. And we do. We also find, I certainly find as CEO, that it is beautifully messy in that there is not a neat line. First we have the inspiration, then we have the intention, then we have the integrity, then we have the impact. It's circular and it's interconnected. So that diagram, if you can imagine a compass with inspiration, intention, integrity, impact as four corners, there are lines bisecting and connecting all over the place, and they're vibrating with energetic, creative design and practice all the time. So, and in some ways they surprise me. So one of the ways that I apply the values in action compass to my work as CEO of Leonardo is by listening and learning from unexpected connections and interconnections between different parts of our community around the world, our hybrid creatives who engage with arts, science, technology, and may not be connected to each other and then discover each other, the connections between our Cryptech incubator looking at innovations in technology led by disabled artists, and our impact labs in Amman and in Dunedin, New Zealand, and where and how there are indigenous wisdom traditions intersecting with artificial intelligence that are playing out through laser-hosted events around the world, or our special issues on artificial intelligence and augmented wisdom in partnership with Tsinghua University. All of these interconnections reveal surprising insights. And I think perhaps insight would be an additional eye we could add to those four cardinal compass points that's in the center. When they interconnect and intersect, there's insight that gives unexpected, not only intelligence, but joy and beauty. So applying this tool of the values in action compass to the work of managing an international nonprofit as CEO or in any role that we play has to also allow for the creativity of a balance and an interplay between the systematic approach and the unexpected reality that emerges, that we're constantly learning, constantly growing, constantly shifting, because we're alive and it's a living organism. And approaching it that way makes the work of executive management and nonprofit development really creative.
That basically means that all of the different elements, it can be from the four eyes or other different elements, they're all co-creative.
I suppose so. And you're right. And I don't know that I have seen or said that before, or not in those words. And it's helpful to have that language. It is co-creative, at its best. And it's also, a constant practice of recalibrating and getting there. And the getting there is the process of continually co-creating together.
Mm-hmm. Very beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you also for giving us the examples of how you practice all of the four eyes. And I would love to end our interview with a question about something very beautiful, about the letter to your unborn granddaughter that you wrote for our conference this year. And I'm mentioning that because I personally just fell in love with the letter. It's very beautifully written. And the way you also provided or graced us with the letter was very beautiful. Your granddaughter is already here. And congratulations again on becoming a grandmother. I would love to ask you about the hopes and the wishes you have for the future for your granddaughter and for the new generation to come.
Thank you. I feel a lot in response to that question. I'm finding myself very moved because my hope and my wish isn't for my granddaughter, who's now here, 2.5 weeks old. She is the hope. She's bringing us the hope. So my hope is for us as a species to be blessed with that promise of new life and the hope that new life brings. I feel that my wishes for my granddaughter and those yet to come are that we are present and alive enough, alert enough, in love enough to welcome and recognize that the fact of them, their arrival, is the hope for all of us. And there's nothing more powerful than the promise of new life and living love to counter the fears and the threats that otherwise shadow the time that we're in. There's so much light in that new life and that new love, or that enduring love. They are the hope. And if we are co-creating hope together, then my wish would be that we are open to that with them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Diana, for your time today. Thank you for sharing all of the different tips and wisdom with us. I'm sure our listeners will definitely enjoy this conversation, and I'm so grateful that we met and I can learn from you each time I meet you.
Likewise, thank you so much. I learned from being with you too.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Creative Bites. It's been a pleasure sharing these stories and insights with you. Remember, creativity is all around us, ready to be discovered, nurtured, and celebrated. I'm Ivona Fluda, and until next time, keep creating, keep exploring, and keep inspiring. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.